Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Knock at Dawn. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. when the desperate knocking shattered the silence of our suburban home. I bolted upright, instantly alert. 20 years in the military had trained that in my bones. Beside me, my wife Cheryl Merritt stirred, her blonde hair catching the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window. "James, what is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with what I initially mistook for concern. The knocking came again, more frantic this time. Small fists pounding against wood with the desperation of someone running from death itself. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. "Uncle James! Uncle James, please!" The voice froze my blood. "Kelly, my 7-year-old niece, my brother Doug Crawford's youngest daughter. What the hell was she doing here at this hour?" Doug lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and Kelly should have been safe in her bed. I rushed down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the frosted glass of our front door, I could make out a small silhouette, trembling, desperate. "Don't let her in." Cheryl's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and commanding. She had followed me downstairs, now standing at the bottom of the staircase in her silk nightgown. "Call the police, James. Call them now." I spun around to face her, confusion and anger warring in my chest. "What the hell are you talking about?" "That's Kelly. I said call the police." Her green eyes were wide, but not with fear, with something else. Something that made my stomach clench. "Don't open that door." The knocking had stopped. Through the glass, I could see Kelly had collapsed against our door, her small body shaking. Her purple pajamas, the ones with unicorns that she'd worn to our last family barbecue, were torn at the shoulder and dirty. Her feet were bare, pale against the dark porch. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone. Not because I was afraid, but because something in my wife's voice, in her eyes, told me this night was about to change everything. I dialed 911, never taking my eyes off Cheryl's face. "911, what's your emergency?" "This is James Graham at 1247 Maple Street. My 7-year-old niece just showed up at my door in the middle of the night. She appears to be in distress. Her clothes are torn, and she's barefoot. Sir, are you able to safely bring the child inside?" I looked at Cheryl, who was shaking her head violently. "My wife is concerned about letting her in. I'm not sure what's happening here. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Please remain on the line." Within minutes, the quiet suburban street erupted into chaos. Red and blue lights painted our neighbors' houses in alternating colors as 3 squad cars screamed to a halt in front of our home. But instead of simply approaching the door, the officers began setting up a perimeter around our house. I watched through our living room window as Officer Thomas O'Brien, whom I recognized from community events, spoke rapidly into his radio. More cars arrived, unmarked vehicles with grim-faced detectives, a black SUV that had federal plates. "What the fuck is going on here?" I demanded, turning to face Cheryl. She was backing away from me, her face pale as alabaster. "James, I can explain." "Explain what? Why did you tell me not to help my niece? Why are the police treating our house like a crime scene?" Before she could answer, a bullhorn crackled to life outside. "James Graham, this is Detective Nelson Riley with the State Police. We need you to come outside with your hands visible. Do not bring anyone else with you." My military training kicked in. I assessed the situation with cold clarity. My niece was in danger, my wife was acting suspiciously, and law enforcement was treating me as either a victim or a suspect. I needed information, and I needed it fast. I opened the door slowly, my hands raised. Kelly was no longer on the porch. Paramedics were loading her into an ambulance, her small face barely visible under an oxygen mask. Relief flooded through me that she was getting help. "Mr. Graham," Detective Riley approached, his hand resting on his weapon but not drawn. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We need to talk." "About what?" "What's happened to my niece?" "Sir, we received a call approximately 30 minutes ago from your niece. She managed to contact emergency services from a location about 2 miles from here. She told the dispatcher that men were coming to hurt her Uncle James and that her Aunt Cheryl had told them where to find you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to look back at my house, where Cheryl stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette dark against the warm interior light. She said that Aunt Cheryl was with a man she didn't recognize, and they were planning something bad. The child was hiding in what appears to be an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. She managed to escape when they were distracted. My mind raced, connecting dots I didn't want to see. Are you saying my wife is involved in a plot against me? Detective Riley's expression was grim. Mr. Graham, we found evidence at the warehouse that suggests someone was planning to stage your death to look like a suicide. We also found financial documents, life insurance policies, and what appears to be a detailed plan of your daily routine. I felt the world tilt on its axis. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of what I thought was love, loyalty, and partnership. I thought of all the times Cheryl had encouraged me to update my life insurance, to add her as the sole beneficiary of my military pension. The man with your wife, Detective Riley continued, we believe it's Herbert Vaughn. Do you know that name? I did. Herbert Vaughn was Cheryl's yoga instructor, a smooth-talking, pretty boy about 15 years younger than me. I'd met him at a few social events, had even shaken his hand while he smiled at me with perfect white teeth. The son of a bitch had been planning my murder while drinking my beer at my own barbecues. Mr. Graham, we're going to need you to come with us for your protection while we sort this out. Your wife is being taken into custody. I watched as officers moved toward my house. Through the window, I could see Cheryl being read her rights, her face a mask of defiance rather than remorse. She looked directly at me as they cuffed her, and for just a moment, I saw the woman she really was: cold, calculating, and utterly without conscience. As they loaded her into the back of a squad car, she turned her head and mouthed something at me. It took me a moment to realize what she was saying. You should have died. That's when I knew that James Graham, the man who had loved and trusted Cheryl Merritt, was dead. What remained was someone much more dangerous, someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Chapter 2. Uncovering the Web. The state police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. I sat in an interview room that had seen too many broken lives, staring at a manila folder that contained the remains of my marriage. Detective Riley sat across from me, his weathered hands folded over evidence that painted my wife as a stranger. Your niece is stable, he began, sliding a cup of coffee toward me. Physically, she's unharmed. Emotionally, well, that's going to take time. She's a brave kid, Mr. Graham. Without her escape and call, you'd probably be dead by morning. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Kelly had saved my life by risking her own. That debt could never be repaid, but it sure as hell would be honored. Tell me about the plan. I finally managed. Riley opened the folder, revealing photographs of the warehouse where Kelly had been held. It was one of several abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town, a relic from when our area had been more industrial. The photos showed a disturbing level of preparation, detailed maps of my daily routine, photos of my truck, my workplace, even my favorite coffee shop. According to what we've pieced together from evidence and your niece's statement, your wife and Herbert Vaughn have been planning this for at least 6 months, Riley explained. The plan was to make your death look like suicide. They had detailed knowledge of your military service, your struggles with what they assumed was PTSD. I laughed bitterly. I don't have PTSD. My military service was the best years of my life. They were counting on no one questioning that narrative too closely. Military suicide rates, financial stress, a middle-aged man facing a life crisis. It would have been a neat package. He showed me more photos, forged suicide notes in what was supposed to be my handwriting, staged evidence of depression and financial troubles, even a fake diary detailing fictional struggles with war trauma. Herbert Vaughn is more than just a yoga instructor, Riley continued. He's got a record, fraud, identity theft, at least 2 previous relationships where wealthy partners died under suspicious circumstances. Nothing ever stuck, but the pattern is there. And my wife. Your wife provided him with everything he needed to know about you, your assets, your vulnerabilities. She also provided him with access to your niece. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean, access to Kelly? Riley's expression darkened. Your wife picked Kelly up from school yesterday. Told your brother Doug that you had requested a sleepover as a surprise. Doug trusted his sister-in-law, so he let Kelly go. My hands clenched into fists. She used my relationship with my brother to kidnap his daughter. The plan was to hold Kelly somewhere safe while they staged your suicide. Then, as the grieving widow and aunt, your wife would be the perfect person to comfort the family. No one would suspect her of involvement. But something went wrong. Herbert got impatient. According to Kelly, she overheard them arguing about money. Herbert wanted to move faster, take some assets, and disappear. Your wife wanted to stick to the original plan. During their argument, Kelly managed to slip away. I studied the crime scene photos more carefully. The warehouse was littered with fast food containers, evidence of longer occupation than initially planned. There were sleeping bags, camping equipment, and children's toys. Jesus Christ, I whispered. How long were they planning to keep her there? Unknown. But Mr. Graham, there's something else. Riley pulled out another set of documents. We've been investigating your wife's financial activities. She's been moving money around for months, setting up accounts in her maiden name, purchasing life insurance policies you probably don't know about. He was right. I trusted Cheryl to handle most of our finances. I made good money as a construction project manager, and she'd always claimed to be detail-oriented about budgets and investments. I've been grateful to have that responsibility off my plate. She's been systematically positioning herself to benefit from your death, while making it look like you were struggling financially. Classic life insurance fraud, but executed with someone who knew you intimately. How much money are we talking about? Between various policies, your military pension, and asset transfers, approximately $2.8 million. I sat back in my chair, stunned. I'd known we were comfortable, but I hadn't realized how much my military service and years of hard work had accumulated. Cheryl had turned our financial security into my death warrant. There's more, Riley said quietly. We found communications between your wife and Herbert going back over a year. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. They've been planning this methodically. He showed me printed emails and text messages. Reading them was like swallowing glass. Cheryl discussed me like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Herbert laid out detailed plans for my murder with the casual tone of someone planning a weekend trip. In one particularly nauseating exchange, they discussed what Cheryl would wear to my funeral, how long she should wait before publicly dating Herbert, and whether she should keep my dog or have him put down because he might be inconvenient. Mr. Graham, I know this is overwhelming, but I need to ask, do you have somewhere safe to stay? Family you trust completely? I thought of my brother Doug, probably pacing the hospital waiting room, wondering why his 7-year-old daughter was traumatized and his sister-in-law was in police custody. Doug was solid, former Navy, built like a linebacker, with a moral compass that pointed true north. If anyone could help me process this nightmare, it would be him, my brother. But detective, what happens now? What's the legal process? Your wife and Herbert Vaughn are being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, insurance fraud, and several other felonies. The evidence is solid. Your niece's testimony, physical evidence from the warehouse, financial records, and their own communications. When do they get out on bail? Riley's smile was grim. Given the severity of the charges and the flight risk, I doubt they'll get bail. But even if they do, it'll be substantial. I nodded, but my mind was already working beyond the legal system. 20 years in the military had taught me that sometimes justice and the law were two different things. Sometimes you had to take care of problems yourself. Detective, I need to see my niece. The hospital will allow family visits. But Mr. Graham, he leaned forward, his eyes serious. I've seen men in your position before. Men who've been betrayed this completely. Don't do anything that will ruin your life or separate you from the family you have left. I met his gaze steadily. Detective, I appreciate your concern, but you don't know me well enough to worry about what I might do. As I left the police station, my phone buzzed with a text from Doug. Hospital room 314. Kelly's asking for you. But first, I had a stop to make. I needed to go home and see what remained of my life, and I needed to start planning what came next. Because Detective Riley was wrong about one thing. He thought the legal system would provide justice. I knew better. Real justice would require a more personal touch. Chapter 3. The Reckoning Begins. Doug Crawford was standing in the hospital corridor when I arrived, his massive frame filling the space between the vending machines. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of solid muscle, my younger brother had always been physically imposing, but tonight he looked like a man barely containing volcanic rage. 23 years, James, he said without preamble, his voice low and dangerous. 23 years that woman sat at our dinner table, held my daughter, called herself family. I clasped his shoulder, feeling the tension radiating through him like a live wire. How is she? Physically fine. Mentally, he ran a hand through his graying hair. She keeps asking if the bad people are going to come back for you. She thinks it's her fault somehow. It's not her fault. She saved my life. I know that. You know that. Try explaining it to a 7-year-old who watched her aunt plan her uncle's murder. Through the window of room 314, I could see Kelly curled up in the hospital bed, dwarfed by white sheets and surrounded by stuffed animals that nurses had brought her. Her dark hair was clean now, brushed back from a face that looked far too serious for someone who should be worried about nothing more than second-grade spelling tests. The police told me about the plan, Doug continued. Insurance money, staged suicide, the whole sick scheme. But James, there's something else. Something I need to tell you before you see Kelly. I turned to face him fully. Doug had the same gray eyes as our father, and right now they were filled with a pain that went beyond anger. Cheryl came to see me 3 weeks ago, said she was worried about you, that you'd been acting strange, talking about not wanting to be a burden to anyone. She suggested I might want to spend more time with you, help you through whatever you were going through. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. She was setting up the narrative, making sure family members would remember you being concerned about my mental state. Exactly. And I believed her, James. I actually thought you might be struggling with something and were too proud to ask for help. I was planning to come by this weekend for a beer and a conversation. You couldn't have known. But that's not the worst part. Doug's voice dropped even lower. She asked me about Kelly's school schedule. Said she wanted to surprise you by having Kelly over for a weekend, maybe take her to that new amusement park. I gave her all the details, when Kelly got out of school, which days I worked late, when my wife Claire would be traveling for work. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They didn't just grab her on impulse. They planned which day to take her. Yeah, and I handed them the blueprint. Before I could respond, a small voice called out from the hospital room. Uncle James? Is it you? We entered the room together, and Kelly immediately reached out for me with thin arms. I gathered her carefully, mindful of the 4-line in her small hand. Hey, little warrior, I said softly. I heard you were pretty brave tonight. I was scared, she whispered against my neck. But I remember what you taught me about being brave. You said brave people do the right thing, even when they're scared. That's right, and you did the right thing. You saved me, Kelly. Aunt Cheryl said she loved you. But people who love you don't try to hurt you, do they? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us the worst? No, honey. People who really love you don't try to hurt you. Sometimes grown-ups pretend to love someone when they don't really. Like lying. Exactly like lying. She was quiet for a moment, processing this with the serious concentration that children bring to understanding adult failures. Uncle James, are you going to be okay? I looked into her trusting eyes and made a promise that would shape everything that followed. Yes, Kelly, I'm going to be more than okay. The people who try to hurt us aren't going to bother anyone ever again. Doug caught something in my tone, a hardness that hadn't been there before. He gave me a sharp look, but said nothing in front of Kelly. After we tucked her in and she'd finally fallen asleep, Doug and I walked to the hospital cafeteria. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on empty tables and chairs. What did you mean back there? Doug asked. About them not bothering anyone again. I studied my brother's face. Doug had served 8 years in the Navy, including 2 deployments to the Middle East. He understood that sometimes the world required a harder justice than courts could provide. The legal system will do what it can, I said carefully. But people like Herbert Vaughn don't learn from prison time. They just get better at hiding what they are. And Cheryl looked me in the eye tonight and mouthed, "You should have died." She's not the woman I married, Doug. She's something else entirely. Doug was quiet for a long moment, stirring coffee he wasn't drinking. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that they made this personal when they brought Kelly into it. They traumatized a 7-year-old girl to steal money and have me killed. That goes beyond anything the courts can address. James, you need to be careful. I can't lose my brother or my daughter's uncle because you did something stupid." "I'm not going to do anything stupid," I said, meeting his eyes. "But I'm going to do something permanent." Over the next hour, I laid out what I'd learned from Detective Riley, the scope of the betrayal, and the cold calculation behind it all. Doug listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "The warehouse they held Kelly in," he said finally. "You know who owns that property?" I shook my head. "It belongs to Gustavo Pike. Remember him? He ran that construction company that went under about 5 years ago. Word is he's been involved in some shady stuff since then: money laundering, drug distribution, human trafficking." Something clicked in my mind. Herbert Vaughn had to have connections to get access to that warehouse. This isn't just insurance fraud, Doug. This is bigger. "Yeah, and that means Herbert has friends we don't know about. Dangerous friends." "Good," I said, and Doug raised an eyebrow at my tone. "Because dangerous people tend to have dangerous enemies. And enemies can be useful. What are you planning, James?" I stood up, suddenly feeling more focused than I had since this nightmare began. "I'm going to give Herbert Vaughn and my wife exactly what they try to give me, a permanent solution to their problem." "And how are you going to do that without ending up in prison yourself?" I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Doug, I spent 20 years in military intelligence. I know things about people that they don't know I know. Herbert and Cheryl think they're the predators in this situation. And they're wrong. Dead wrong. They just woke up something they should have left sleeping." As we left the hospital, I was already forming the outline of a plan. Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl had used my trust against me, had turned my family into weapons for their scheme. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive and given me motivation. Over the next few days, while they sat in jail believing they'd been caught by simple bad luck, I would systematically dismantle their lives, their futures, and their hope for mercy. They wanted James Graham dead. I was going to grant their wish. The old James Graham would die, and what emerged would be their worst nightmare. Chapter 4. The Man Behind the Mask. 3 days after Cheryl's arrest, I sat in the lawyer's office that had handled our estate planning, staring at documents that revealed the true scope of my wife's betrayal. Patricia Thompson, our attorney for the past 15 years, looked as shaken as I felt. "James, I need to apologize," she said, her usually steady voice trembling. "Your wife came to see me 6 months ago. She requested changes to your will and power of attorney documents. She claimed you were suffering from service-related stress and wanted to ensure she could handle your affairs if something happened." "What kind of changes?" Patricia slid a folder across her mahogany desk. "She wanted to be made the sole beneficiary of everything: your military pension, the house, all bank accounts, and life insurance policies. She also requested medical power of attorney, claiming you'd asked her to handle any health decisions if you became incapacitated." I reviewed the documents, noting the careful legal language that would have given Cheryl complete control over my life and death. "Did you process these changes?" "No, and thank God I didn't. Something felt wrong about the request. You'd never mentioned any health concerns or psychological issues in our previous meetings. You seemed like one of the most stable clients I had. So what did you do?" I told her I needed to meet with both of you together before making such significant changes. She became agitated and said you were too proud to discuss your problems with outsiders. When I insisted, she said she'd convince you to schedule an appointment, which never happened. Exactly. She called several times over the following months, each time more insistent. The last call was 2 weeks ago. She was angry, said that if I wouldn't help her protect her husband's interests, she'd find an attorney who would. I leaned back in the leather chair, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. She needed those documents to complete the fraud. Without legal authority over my affairs, any suspicious death would trigger investigations. "James, there's something else." Patricia opened another file. I did some checking after your wife's arrest. She consulted with 3 other law firms in the past month, trying to find someone who would process those documents. Did anyone agree? Oliver Farrell at Farrell & Associates took the case. He processed new documents, making your wife your sole beneficiary and giving her broad power of attorney. The documents are dated last week. I felt my jaw clench. Oliver Farrell was a bottom feeder who'd been censured twice by the state bar for questionable practices. If you needed legal work done without too many questions asked, Farrell was your man. Here's the interesting part, Patricia continued. Farrell required a substantial retainer, $25,000. Your wife paid it in cash. Cash. Where the hell did she get $25,000 in cash? That's what I'm wondering. James, I think you need to understand that your wife's betrayal goes deeper than insurance fraud. This has been a long-term operation. After leaving Patricia's office, I drove to the construction site where I worked as a project manager. Merritt Construction, ironically named, considering my wife's maiden name, had been my employer for 8 years. I'd built a reputation as someone who got projects done on time and under budget, no matter how complex. My foreman, Perry Yoder, met me at the trailer that served as our on-site office. Perry was approaching 60, with the weathered hands and sharp eyes of someone who'd spent 40 years in construction. He was also one of the few people I trusted completely. Heard about your troubles, James, he said without preamble. Anything you need, you let me know. Actually, Perry, there is something. I need information about Gustavo Pike. Perry's expression darkened. Pike? That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Why are you asking about that piece of garbage? He owns the warehouse where they held my niece. I think he's connected to this whole thing. Perry poured 2 cups of coffee from the perpetually brewing pot in the corner. Pike went dirty about 3 years ago, after his construction business failed. Started laundering money for some very bad people. Word is he's involved in everything: drugs, guns, human trafficking. What kind of very bad people? The kind that make people disappear permanently. James, if Pike is involved in your situation, you need to be very careful. This isn't just about insurance money anymore. I'd suspected as much. Herbert Vaughn was too smooth, too prepared for this to be his first time manipulating someone into a grave. Perry, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot, if someone had hurt your family the way mine's been hurt, what would you do? Perry was quiet for a long moment, staring out the trailer window at the skeleton of the building we were constructing. I'd make sure they never hurt anyone else's family, even if it meant going outside the law. James, the law is a luxury for people who've never had someone try to murder them and kidnap their kids. Sometimes you have to handle things yourself. And if I needed help handling things? Perry turned to face me, his gray eyes steady. Then you have it. No questions asked. That afternoon, I met Doug at a shooting range outside town. We'd been coming here together since we were teenagers, and the familiar smell of gun oil and cordite was oddly comforting. Doug was already at our usual lane, methodically putting rounds through the center of a paper target. Any word from the police about when they'll be arraigned? He asked, not looking up from his shooting stance. Next week. Bail hearing is Thursday. You think they'll get out? Probably. Herbert's got money from somewhere, and Cheryl's got no prior record. They'll make bail, and then they'll disappear. Doug lowered his pistol and turned to face me. Unless someone stops them first. That's what I'm thinking. We shot in comfortable silence for a while, the repetitive bang of gunfire providing a rhythm for my planning. I'd always been a good shot, but military training had made me exceptional. Doug was equally skilled. The Crawford brothers didn't do anything halfway. I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, Doug said eventually. About them having dangerous friends. And I did some asking around. Gustavo Pike isn't just connected to criminals. He's connected to Colin Sanderson. The name hit me like a physical blow. Colin Sanderson was the closest thing our area had to a crime boss: drugs, prostitution, illegal gambling, loan sharking. If you needed something illegal done, and you had enough money, Sanderson's organization could handle it. How connected? Pike handles property for Sanderson's operation. Warehouses, safe houses, meeting places. The warehouse where they held Kelly? It's part of Sanderson's network. I absorbed this information, my mind racing through implications. If Herbert was connected to Colin Sanderson, then this wasn't just insurance fraud. This was organized crime. Doug, I need you to understand something. If I go after these people, it's going to get ugly. Real ugly. Are you prepared for that? James, they kidnapped my daughter and try to murder my brother. I'm prepared for whatever it takes, even if it means we might not come back from it. Doug's smile was cold as winter steel. Especially then. As we packed up our gear, I outlined the beginning of my plan. It was ambitious, dangerous, and would require perfect timing. But it would give Herbert Vaughn, Cheryl, and their criminal associates exactly what they try to give me. A permanent solution to their problem. When do we start? Doug asked. Tonight. We're going to pay a visit to Oliver Farrell and find out exactly how much my wife paid him and where that money came from. And if he doesn't want to talk, I checked the magazine in my concealed carry pistol and slipped it back into its holster. Then we'll convince him that talking is his best option. The old James Graham would have waited for the legal system to handle everything. But that man was dead, killed in the moment when his wife looked him in the eye and wished he'd died. What remained was someone much more dangerous, someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. Chapter 5. Gathering Intelligence. Oliver Farrell's law office occupied the second floor of a rundown building in the older part of town, wedged between a pawn shop and a check-cashing store. The kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions about what happened after dark. Doug and I waited in my truck across the street, watching the windows of Farrell's office. It was 9:30 p.m., well past normal business hours, but the lights were still on. Through the grimy windows, we could see Farrell moving around, apparently working late. He's alone, Doug observed, adjusting the night vision scope we'd borrowed from his police contacts. Security system looks basic, just door sensors and maybe a motion detector. Any cameras? One outside the front entrance, pointed at the street. Nothing covering the back alley. I check my watch. Give it another 15 minutes. Let the street clear out completely. We'd spent the afternoon doing reconnaissance, mapping escape routes, and identifying potential complications. I'd also made some calls to old military contacts, men who understood that sometimes justice required an unofficial approach. The plan was simple. Get Farrell alone and find out exactly how much he knew about Cheryl's activities. If he was just a corrupt lawyer taking money for document fraud, we'd scare him and move on. If he was more deeply involved, the conversation would get more intensive. James, Doug said quietly, you sure about this? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. They crossed the line when they put their hands on Kelly. Everything after that is just consequences. At 9:45, we moved. Doug went around to cover the back exit while I approached the front door. The building's main entrance was secured with a simple lock that took me less than 30 seconds to bypass. Skills learned in places the Army didn't officially acknowledge. Farrell's office was on the second floor, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked under my weight. I could hear him moving around inside, shuffling papers and talking on the phone. Perfect. I waited at his door, listening to his conversation. He was talking to someone about moving money, using language that suggested this wasn't his first time handling questionable transactions. When his call ended, I knocked. We're closed, came the irritated response. Mr. Farrell, I need to discuss the documents you prepared for my wife, Cheryl Merritt. The silence that followed lasted 10 seconds too long. When the door finally opened, Farrell's face was pale and sweaty. He was a thin man in his 50s, with the look of someone who'd spent years cutting corners and making compromises. Mr. Graham, I heard about your wife's situation. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss client-privileged information. You can and you will, I said, stepping into his office and closing the door behind me. Because if you don't, this conversation is going to become very unpleasant very quickly. Farrell backed away, his hands raised defensively. Look, I just prepared some legal documents. Standard stuff. I didn't know about any criminal activity. $25,000 in cash isn't standard payment for will modifications, Oliver. Where did that money come from? I don't know. Your wife said she'd been saving it. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of Kelly in a hospital bed. This is my 7-year-old niece. Your client and her boyfriend kidnapped her as part of a plan to murder me and steal my assets. So I'm going to ask you again, where did the money come from? Farrell's face went white. Jesus Christ, I didn't know about any kidnapping. I swear I didn't know. But you knew something was wrong with the transaction. Yeah, okay, yes. The cash payment was unusual, and your wife seemed intense. But Mr. Graham, I've got gambling debts. I needed that retainer. I sat down in the chair across from his desk, my posture relaxed but my eyes hard. Tell me everything you know about my wife's activities. Every conversation, every transaction, every person she mentioned. For the next 20 minutes, Farrell spilled everything. Cheryl had approached him 6 weeks earlier, claiming she needed power of attorney documents because her husband was suffering from PTSD and making poor decisions. She'd been insistent that the documents be prepared quickly and discreetly. She came back 3 times to modify the language, Farrell explained. Each time, she wanted broader authority. The final version gave her control over everything: your finances, medical decisions, even the right to make funeral arrangements. Did she mention Herbert Vaughn? Once. She said her business partner needed to review the documents before finalization. I got the impression this partner was financing the operation. What kind of operation? I don't know specifics, but your wife mentioned they were planning to relocate after your affairs were settled. Somewhere tropical, she said. I leaned forward. Oliver, who else knew about these documents? Nobody. Your wife insisted on complete confidentiality. Think harder. Did you make copies? Did anyone else in your office see them? Farrell's eyes darted toward a filing cabinet in the corner. I might have mentioned the case to Colin Sanderson. There it was. The connection I'd been looking for. Why would you discuss my wife's legal matters with Colin Sanderson? Because he's one of my primary clients. And because he asked me to let him know if anyone came to me with unusual requests involving large sums of money. The pieces were falling into place. Colin Sanderson wasn't just connected to this scheme. He was likely the one financing it. Herbert Vaughn was just the muscle, and Cheryl was the inside access. Sanderson was the brains behind the operation. Has Sanderson asked you to do work for anyone else recently? Anyone matching Herbert Vaughn's description? Yeah, actually, about 3 months ago, he had me prepare identity documents for a guy named Herbert. New social security number, birth certificate, the works. Herbert was planning to disappear with a new identity. That's what it looked like. I stood up, having gotten what I came for. Oliver, you're going to do exactly what I tell you. And if you do it right, you might live through this. What do you want? You're going to call Colin Sanderson and set up a meeting. Tell him you have information about the Graham case that he needs to hear in person. He'll kill me if he finds out I talked to you. He'll kill you anyway, Oliver. You're a loose end. The only question is whether you die as his victim or as someone who helped take him down. Farrell's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. When do you want this meeting? Tomorrow night. Somewhere public, but private. A restaurant with back rooms. And Oliver, yeah. If you try to warn Sanderson or anyone else about this conversation, I'll make sure you suffer before you die. Are we clear? Farrell nodded rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. As I left his office, I felt the familiar calm that came with having a clear mission and the tools to complete it. Colin Sanderson thought he was the predator in this situation, using Herbert and Cheryl to eliminate an obstacle and steal a fortune. He was about to learn that sometimes the prey bites back. Chapter 6. Setting the Trap. The meeting was set for 8 p.m. at Moretti's, an Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town that catered to people who valued privacy over ambience. Colin Sanderson had agreed to meet with Oliver Farrell in one of the back dining rooms, supposedly to discuss complications with the Graham case. Doug and I had spent the day preparing. We'd acquired equipment that wasn't available through normal channels, surveillance gear, weapons that couldn't be traced, and most importantly, leverage that would ensure Colin Sanderson's cooperation. You sure about this approach? Doug asked as we conducted final equipment checks in an abandoned warehouse 20 minutes from the restaurant. Once we take Sanderson, there's no walking away from this. I'm sure. These people try to murder me and traumatize a 7-year-old girl. They don't get to walk away from that. We learned more about Colin Sanderson's operation through contacts Doug had in law enforcement. Sanderson ran a sophisticated criminal enterprise, But he had weaknesses. He was a family man with a wife and teenage daughter who knew nothing about his criminal activities. He was also paranoid about law enforcement, which made him predictable. Farrell called an hour ago. Doug reported. Sanderson is coming alone, as expected. He doesn't want witnesses to whatever Farrell has to tell him. Perfect. You're in position at the restaurant. Yeah. Kitchen staff is gone by 7:30, and the owner leaves by 8. After that, it's just Sanderson, Farrell, and us. I checked the recording equipment one more time. Everything Sanderson said tonight would be documented, and if he was smart, he'd realize that cooperation was his only option for survival. At 7:45, I took my position in the restaurant's basement, accessing it through a delivery entrance that Doug had unlocked earlier. The building was old, with a layout that provided multiple entry and exit points. Perfect for what we had planned. Through the surveillance equipment Doug had installed, I could hear Oliver Farrell pacing nervously in the back dining room. He was terrified, which was exactly how I wanted him. Scared people made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. At exactly 8 p.m., Colin Sanderson arrived. I'd seen photos of him, but meeting someone in person always provided details that pictures couldn't capture. Sanderson was in his late 40s, well-dressed, but not flashy, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested he'd done terrible things and slept well afterward. Oliver, Sanderson's voice came through clearly on the surveillance feed. You said there were complications with the Graham situation. Yeah, there are. James Graham came to see me last night. I thought Graham was in protective custody. He was, but apparently he's been released. Colin, he knows about the documents I prepared. He knows about the cash payment. And he's asking questions about you. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to move into position outside the dining room. Through a crack in the door, I could see Sanderson's face, and it wasn't happy. What exactly did you tell him, Oliver? Nothing. I swear I didn't tell him anything important. But you told him something. I might have mentioned that you were a client. That's all. I heard the distinctive sound of a pistol being cocked. Oliver, you've become a liability. That was my cue. I pushed through the door, my own weapon drawn, and aimed at Sanderson's head. Drop it, Colin. Nice and slow. Sanderson was good. I had to give him that. He didn't panic or make any sudden moves. He carefully placed his pistol on the table and raised his hands. James Graham, I presume. I have to admit, I didn't expect you to be this proactive. People keep underestimating me. It's becoming a theme. Doug entered through the kitchen door, his rifle trained on Sanderson from a different angle. We now had complete control of the situation. Oliver, you can leave, I said without taking my eyes off Sanderson. And Oliver, if you ever speak about tonight to anyone, I'll find you. Farrell practically ran from the room, leaving the three of us alone. So, Colin, I said, settling into a chair across from him. Let's talk about your business relationship with my wife and Herbert Vaughn. I don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer. I nodded to Doug, who moved closer to Sanderson. Let me explain how this works. You're going to tell me everything you know about the plan to kill me, and in exchange, I'm going to let you live. And if I don't, then your wife, Anna, gets a visit from some very unpleasant people who will explain in detail what her husband does for a living. Sanderson's composed expression cracked slightly. You wouldn't involve civilians. You involved my 7-year-old niece. That makes your family fair game. For the next hour, Colin Sanderson told us everything. The plan had been his idea from the beginning. Identify wealthy targets with unfaithful spouses, recruit the spouse as an inside accomplice, and stage elaborate insurance frauds. Herbert Vaughn was his specialist in this type of operation, a sociopath with a talent for seduction and manipulation. How many times have you done this? I asked. Graham is the 4th target. The previous 3 were all successful. You mean 3 other people are dead? Yes. And their spouses? Relocated with new identities after collecting the insurance money. They get to keep 30%, I get 70%. What about Herbert? Herbert gets a flat fee for his services, plus whatever personal items he can liquidate. He's not in it for the money. He enjoys the manipulation. I felt my jaw clench. We weren't just dealing with insurance fraud. We were dealing with serial killers. Where are the previous targets' families now? I don't know. Once they get their cut of the money, they disappear. That's the arrangement. But you could find them if you wanted to. Probably. Doug leaned forward. Colin, those families deserve to know what happened to their relatives. You're going to help us find them. And in exchange? In exchange, I said, you get to live long enough to see the inside of a federal prison instead of the inside of a coffin. You're going to turn me over to the FBI? Eventually. But first, you're going to help us deal with Herbert Vaughn and my wife. Sanderson's eyes narrowed. What do you want me to do? You're going to arrange for Herbert to escape from jail. And when he does, he's going to find out that some problems can't be solved by running away. And your wife? My wife made her choice when she decided I should die. Now she gets to live with the consequences. As we prepared to leave Moretti's, Colin Sanderson secured and ready for transport to a location where he could contemplate his cooperation, I felt the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl thought they were the hunters in this situation. Tomorrow, they would learn that they'd been wrong from the very beginning. The prey had become the predator, and the hunt was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Escape. The jailbreak happened exactly as we'd planned. Colin Sanderson had contacts throughout the region, including guards at the county jail who were willing to overlook certain security lapses for the right price. At 3:17 a.m. on Tuesday morning, Herbert Vaughn walked out of his cell and through a back exit that had mysteriously been left unlocked. Doug and I watched from across the street as Herbert emerged from the jail, wearing civilian clothes that had been left for him in a predetermined location. He looked confident, probably believing that Sanderson's resources had saved him from prosecution. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. He's moving toward the parking garage, Doug reported through our radio link. Black sedan, license plate Charlie Delta 749. I see him. Stay in position until he's clear of the downtown area. Herbert drove carefully, following traffic laws and avoiding any behavior that might attract police attention. He was good at this, probably had experience evading law enforcement from previous jobs. But we were better. I followed at a distance, using techniques learned in military surveillance operations. Herbert was heading east toward the interstate, probably planning to disappear into another state where Sanderson had safe houses and new identities waiting. He's taking exit 47. I radioed to Doug, who was paralleling our route on surface streets, heading toward the industrial district. Copy that. I'm moving to intercept position. The industrial district was perfect for what we had planned. Abandoned buildings, minimal traffic, and no surveillance cameras. Herbert parked outside a warehouse that looked identical to dozens of others in the area, but I knew this one was special. It was where Colin Sanderson stored equipment and conducted business that required complete privacy. Herbert used a key to enter through a side door, clearly familiar with the location. He was probably planning to collect money and identity documents before disappearing permanently. Instead, he was about to face the consequences of his choices. Doug and I waited 15 minutes before moving, giving Herbert time to settle in and relax his guard. When we finally approached the warehouse, we could see light coming from windows on the second floor. Motion sensors are disabled, Doug whispered, checking the security system from outside. Sanderson's cooperation is paying off. We entered through the same door Herbert had used, our weapons drawn and ready. The warehouse was filled with stolen merchandise, drug packaging equipment, and other evidence of Sanderson's criminal empire. But we weren't there for evidence. We were there for justice. Herbert was in the second floor office, counting money from a safe that had been left open for his convenience. He had his back to the door, completely focused on his task. Hello, Herbert. He spun around, his hand reaching for a pistol on the desk, but Doug was already behind him with a rifle pressed against his neck. I wouldn't, Doug said calmly. James has questions for you. Herbert's face cycled through surprise, fear, and then calculation. Even caught red-handed, he was looking for angles, for ways to manipulate the situation to his advantage. James Graham. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people don't recover this quickly from having their lives destroyed. Most people don't have their lives destroyed by psychopaths and their cheating wives. I settled into a chair across from him, keeping my pistol trained on his chest. Herbert, you and I are going to have a conversation about your previous work. Specifically, the 3 other people you've murdered for Colin Sanderson. I don't know what you're talking about. Wrong answer. I nodded to Doug, who pressed the rifle barrel harder against Herbert's neck. Let me be clear about something. You're not leaving this warehouse alive unless you tell me everything I want to know. And if I do tell you, then you get to choose how you die. Herbert's confident facade cracked slightly. You're not a killer, Graham. You're a construction manager, a family man. You don't have it in you. You're right, I said. The old James Graham wasn't a killer. But that man died when you and my wife decided I should. What's left is someone much more dangerous. I showed him photos on my phone, surveillance images of his previous victims, crime scene photos, and pictures of the families he destroyed. Thomas O'Brien, age 45, married 20 years. You seduced his wife, Linda, convinced her to help you stage his suicide. Thomas had 3 kids who still believe their father killed himself because he couldn't handle being a failure. Herbert's expression didn't change, but I could see recognition in his eyes. Jeffrey Livingston, age 52, widowed and remarried. You targeted his second wife, Patricia, convinced her that Jeffrey was planning to divorce her and leave her with nothing. Jeffrey died in what looked like a hunting accident. And Jim Gould, age 38, whose wife Sarah thought she'd found true love with a yoga instructor who understood her better than her husband did. Jim died in a house fire that destroyed all evidence of the insurance fraud. I leaned forward, my voice low and dangerous. 3 men dead, 3 families destroyed. Also, you and your accomplices could steal money and start new lives. And now you try to add me to that list. Those men were weak, Herbert said, his mask finally slipping to reveal the monster underneath. They trusted their wives, believed in love and loyalty. They deserved what they got for being naive. Doug's grip tightened on his rifle. You son of a bitch. Herbert, I said calmly, you just made this very easy for me. What do you mean? I was going to give you a choice about how this ended. But after hearing you dismiss 3 innocent men as deserving death for the crime of loving their wives, I've made the choice for you. I stood up, checking my weapon. You're going to call my wife. What? You're going to call Cheryl and tell her that you've escaped, that you need her to meet you somewhere isolated so you can disappear together. She'll never agree to that. She's in jail. Actually, she's not. Colin Sanderson arranged for her release on bail this morning. She's staying at the Comfort Inn on Route 9, probably wondering why you haven't contacted her. Herbert's eyes widened as he realized the scope of our planning. You orchestrated all of this. That's right. And when Cheryl arrives to meet you, she's going to discover that some betrayals have permanent consequences. You're going to kill us both. Eventually. But first, you're both going to confess to the murders of Thomas O'Brien, Jeffrey Livingston, and Jim Gould. You're going to provide details that only the killers would know. And you're going to do it because the alternative is much, much worse. I showed him photos of the warehouse's basement, where Colin Sanderson had conducted interrogations for clients who needed information extracted from uncooperative subjects. Herbert, you have 2 choices. You can cooperate and die quickly, or you can refuse and spend the next several days wishing you'd cooperated. Looking into my eyes, Herbert Von finally understood that he'd misjudged his victim. The man he'd planned to murder wasn't weak or naive. He was someone who understood that mercy was a luxury that had to be earned. And Herbert Vaughn had done nothing to earn it. Chapter 8. The Final Meeting. The call went exactly as I predicted. Herbert, his voice steady despite the rifle barrel pressed against his spine, contacted Cheryl and arranged to meet her at an abandoned gas station 15 miles outside town. He told her he'd escaped with Sanderson's help and had money and new identities waiting. All she had to do was meet him at midnight for their new life together. Cheryl agreed without hesitation, proving once again that she cared nothing for the husband she'd planned to murder or the niece she'd traumatized. She sounded excited, Herbert said after ending the call, like this was all just an adventure to her. Some people are monsters, I replied. The only difference is that most monsters don't hide behind wedding rings and family barbecues. Doug and I spent the rest of the evening preparing the abandoned gas station for our final meeting. It was perfect for our purposes, isolated, no surveillance cameras, and multiple escape routes if law enforcement became involved. Not that we planned to leave any loose ends that would require investigation. At 11:30 p.m., we moved Herbert to the location. He was secured but mobile, able to play his part in the reunion we'd orchestrated. The plan was simple. Let Cheryl believe she was meeting her lover for a romantic escape, then confront them both with the evidence of their crimes and the consequences of their choices. "She's coming," Doug reported from his observation position. "Single vehicle. Matches the description of her car." Through the night vision scope, I watched my wife of 23 years drive toward what she believed was freedom. She'd dressed for travel, practical clothes, minimal jewelry, probably carrying cash and new identity documents. She looked happy, more animated than I'd seen her in months. That happiness was about to end permanently. Cheryl parked next to Herbert's car and got out, looking around nervously before approaching the gas station's main building. Herbert emerged from the shadows, and I watched through the scope as they embraced. It was the first time I'd seen them together, and the casual intimacy between them made my stomach clench. 23 years of marriage, and she'd never looked at me the way she was looking at Herbert Vaughn. "James," Doug's voice came through the radio. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "I'm sure." I moved closer, keeping to the shadows until I was within 20 feet of their reunion. They were talking in low voices, probably discussing their escape plans and their new life together. "Did you get the money from Sanderson's safe?" Cheryl asked. "All of it. $200,000 in cash, plus the new identity documents. By tomorrow morning, Herbert and Cheryl will be dead, and Marcus and Diana will be on a plane to Costa Rica. And James is yesterday's problem. By the time they find his body, will be untouchable." That was enough. I stepped out of the shadows, my weapon drawn, and aimed at Herbert's center mass. "Hello, Cheryl." My wife spun around, her face cycling through shock, fear, and then cold calculation. Even caught in the act of planning my murder, she was looking for angles. "James, I can explain." "No need. I heard everything I needed to hear." Doug emerged from his position, his rifle covering both of them. We now had complete control of the situation. "Sit down," I ordered, gesturing to an old picnic table near the gas station. "Both of you." They complied, Herbert's confidence finally beginning to crack. Cheryl, however, maintained her composure. She'd always been good under pressure, a trait I'd once admired. "James, you have to understand," she began. "Our marriage had been dead for years. We were just going through the motions. So you decided to kill me instead of asking for a divorce. It wasn't personal. It was just practical." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Practical. Like kidnapping my niece was practical. We needed leverage to ensure you followed the plan. Kelly was never supposed to be hurt. She's 7 years old, Cheryl. She's traumatized because her aunt plotted her uncle's murder. How is that not hurting her? She'll get over it. Children are resilient. I looked at this woman I'd shared my life with for over 2 decades and realized I'd never really known her at all. The capacity for this level of casual cruelty had always been there. I'd just been too trusting to see it. "Herbert," I said, turning to face him, "tell Cheryl about Thomas O'Brien." "I don't know who that is." "Thomas O'Brien, Jeffrey Livingston, Jim Gould. The 3 other husbands you've murdered. Tell her how this ends for couples who think they can kill for money." Herbert's face went pale. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're a serial killer who specializes in insurance fraud. Cheryl thought she was your partner, but she's just another disposable accomplice." I turned back to my wife. "Cheryl, did Herbert tell you what happened to his previous partners? Linda O'Brien, Patricia Livingston, Sarah Gould. What about them?" "They're all dead. Convenient accidents after the insurance money was collected. Herbert doesn't share, and he doesn't leave witnesses." Cheryl looked at Herbert with dawning horror. "Is that true?" "It doesn't matter now," Herbert said, his voice tight with desperation. "We're all dead anyway." "Not all of us," I said. "Just the 2 of you." For the next hour, I laid out everything we'd learned. The scope of their criminal enterprise, the murders they'd committed, and the trail of destroyed families they'd left behind. I showed them photos of their victims' children, read them excerpts from the fake suicide notes they'd forged, and detailed the cold calculation behind every aspect of their operation. "You stole 23 years of my life," I told Cheryl. "Made me believe we had something real while you planned my murder. You traumatized my niece, destroyed my trust in everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. James, I'm sorry. I never wanted. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. I was right, and we both knew it. Even now, facing certain death, Cheryl was calculating, looking for ways to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Herbert, I said, you're going to write a confession detailing every murder you've committed, every family you've destroyed. You're going to provide details that only the killer would know. And if I refuse, then your death will take considerably longer. Herbert looked into my eyes and saw his own death reflected there. Whatever he saw convinced him that cooperation was his only option for a quick end. As dawn broke over the abandoned gas station, Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl Merritt completed their written confessions. They detailed 3 previous murders, multiple insurance frauds, and a criminal conspiracy that had spanned 5 years in 4 states. James, Cheryl said as I prepared to end their story, do you remember our wedding day? You promised to love me forever. I kept that promise, I replied. But the woman I made that promise to never existed. What happened next was justice, swift, final, and absolute. Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl Merritt got exactly what they'd planned to give me, with one crucial difference. Their deaths served a purpose beyond greed. The confessions would provide closure for 3 families who'd spent years believing their loved ones had committed suicide. Law enforcement would finally have answers to cases that had gone cold. And James Graham would have the peace that comes from knowing that some debts can only be paid in blood. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, watching my niece Kelly play with a golden retriever puppy I'd bought her for her 8th birthday. The nightmares had finally stopped, and she was laughing again, a sound that had become the most beautiful music in the world. Doug emerged from the cabin carrying 2 beers and settled into the chair beside me. FBI called this morning. They closed the O'Brien case. Linda O'Brien finally has answers about what really happened to her husband. How is she handling it? Better than expected. She said knowing the truth was better than wondering for the rest of her life. The confessions Herbert and Cheryl had written before their deaths had provided law enforcement with everything they needed to close 4 murder cases and expose a criminal conspiracy that had operated across multiple states. Colin Sanderson's cooperation had led to the discovery of additional crimes and the arrest of dozens of associates. Officially, Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl Merritt had died in a murder-suicide at the abandoned gas station. Security footage from a traffic camera had captured them arriving separately, but shown no other vehicles in the area. Their bodies were discovered with their written confessions and evidence of their previous crimes. The investigating officers had concluded that the stress of their arrest and impending prosecution had driven them to this final act. Case closed. Any regrets? Doug asked, not for the first time. None. Even about Cheryl? I thought about that question seriously. 23 years of marriage should have meant something, should have created some emotional debt that would generate guilt or remorse. But the woman who died at that gas station wasn't the woman I'd married. That woman had never existed. What I'd killed was a lie, a carefully constructed facade that had hidden a monster. The woman I married died years ago, I said finally. I just didn't realize it until she tried to kill me. Kelly ran up to the porch, the puppy bouncing around her feet. Uncle James, can we go fishing this afternoon? Absolutely. Did you practice tying those knots I showed you? Yes. Watch. She demonstrated a perfect, improved clinch knot, her small fingers working with the confidence of someone who'd mastered a new skill. Perfect. You're ready for the advanced lessons. As she ran back to play with the puppy, Doug smiled. She's going to be okay. Better than okay. She's going to be strong. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Thompson, my attorney. The estate settlement was finally complete. With Cheryl dead and her crimes exposed, I was the sole inheritor of our assets. The life insurance money she'd tried to steal would instead fund Kelly's college education and provide financial support for the families of Herbert's victims. Justice served, Doug observed, reading the message over my shoulder. Justice served. That afternoon, while Kelly and I fished in the stream behind the cabin, she asked me a question that had been weighing on her mind. Uncle James, are there other bad people like Aunt Cheryl and Herbert? Yes, honey, there are. Will they try to hurt us? I looked at this brave little girl who'd saved my life by risking her own and made her a promise that would shape the rest of my existence. Not if I find them first. That evening, after Kelly had gone to bed, I opened my laptop and began researching cold cases involving suspicious deaths and insurance fraud. 3 other families deserved answers, and their loved ones' killers deserved justice. Herbert Vaughn had mentioned in his confession that he'd worked with other partners before joining Colin Sanderson's organization. Those partners were still out there, still preying on trusting spouses and stealing lives for money. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left a witness who understood that mercy was a luxury the innocent couldn't afford. My name was James Graham. I was 48 years old, a widower, and the guardian of a remarkable little girl who taught me that sometimes the right thing to do was also the dangerous thing to do. I was also something else, the nightmare that monsters like Herbert Vaughn and Cheryl Merritt would never see coming. The old James Graham was dead, killed by betrayal and resurrection by necessity. What remained was someone with particular skills, unlimited motivation, and no patience for people who hurt the innocent. The hunt was just beginning. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of storms to come. But inside the cabin, a little girl slept peacefully, protected by someone who would never again make the mistake of trusting the wrong people. And in the darkness, predators would learn that sometimes the prey evolved into something much more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Rob Dalton had built his life the same way he'd built his construction empire, with precision, patience, and an iron will that never bent. At 45, he commanded respect from competitors and loyalty from employees through a simple philosophy. Those who stood by him prospered, and those who crossed him learned why that was a mistake. The Dalton construction headquarters occupied an entire city block, but Rob still remembered hammering nails as a 17-year-old dropout whose father had abandoned the family. He'd clawed his way from apprentice to foreman to contractor, eventually buying out his former boss and transforming a failing company into a multi-million-dollar operation. His marriage to Jennifer had been different, a rare moment when he'd let his guard down. She'd been 24, working as a dental hygienist, with honey blonde hair and a laugh that seemed genuine in a world full of pretense. Rob had been 30, already successful enough to provide the comfortable life she'd grown up without. "You saved me," Jennifer had whispered on their wedding night, tears glistening as she traced the scars on his knuckles from years of manual labor. 15 years later, those same hands signed million-dollar contracts and employed over 300 people. Their son Tyler, now 14, showed promise on the wrestling team, inheriting his father's determination if not his ruthless edge. Their daughter, Emma, 11, reminded Rob of Jennifer before life had hardened both of them. The family lived in a custom-built mansion on 12 acres outside the city, complete with a basement that Rob had designed as his private sanctuary, a workshop, gym, and office where he planned his business conquests. Jennifer rarely ventured down there, claiming the concrete walls felt cold and prison-like. Rob had always prided himself on reading people, but lately, Jennifer had become unreadable. She'd started working out obsessively, buying expensive clothes, and taking mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. When he questioned her, she'd laughed it off as finally taking care of myself. The first real crack in his suspicion had come 3 weeks ago when Tyler had asked, "Dad, why does Mom get so many deliveries when you're at work?" "What kind of deliveries?" "Flowers, mostly. But she always throws them away before you get home." Rob had filed that information away, the way he cataloged every detail about potential business threats. But this was his wife, the mother of his children, the woman he'd built this empire to protect and provide for. That Tuesday evening, As he reviewed blueprints for a new shopping center, Jennifer announced she'd be out with the girls again, the third time that week. Which girls? Rob asked without looking up from his papers. You don't know them. College friends visiting from Denver. Rob's pen stopped moving. Jennifer had attended community college locally and maintained exactly 0 friendships from that time. She'd never mentioned anyone from Denver. Have fun, he said simply, watching her reflection in the window as she left. She was wearing a dress he'd never seen before, and her perfume was different, heavier, more expensive. Rob had survived in construction by trusting his instincts, and every instinct screamed that his foundation was cracking. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Surface. The private investigator's office occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building Rob had renovated 5 years earlier. Charlie Morrison owed his lease renewal to Rob's generosity during the recession, a debt the former police detective seemed eager to repay. I don't like doing this to friends, Charlie said, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. But you need to see what you're dealing with. The photographs made Rob's jaw clench. Jennifer entering a downtown hotel. Jennifer in a restaurant, leaning across a table to kiss a man Rob recognized immediately. Derek Hoffman, the city planning commissioner who'd fast-tracked several of Rob's permit applications over the years. How long? Rob's voice remained steady, a skill learned from years of hiding weakness from competitors. Best I can tell, about 8 months. Started around the time your company bid on the Riverside project. Rob studied Derek's face in the photos. All boyish charm and politician smile. 15 years younger than Rob, and soft in all the places Rob was hardened by decades of physical labor. There's more, Charlie continued. They're not just meeting at hotels. She's been bringing him to your house. Your neighbors noticed his car there at least 6 times when you were out of town on business. The betrayal burned deeper than Rob had expected. Not just the adultery, but the calculated nature of it. Jennifer had been planning this, using his own success against him, leveraging his trust and his absences. The basement, Rob said quietly. What? She brought him to our basement. My workshop. The implications hit him like a physical blow. His sanctuary, the place where he'd built models with Tyler and helped Emma with science projects, defiled by his wife and a man he'd actually helped succeed. Charlie shifted uncomfortably. Rob, I've seen a lot of ugly divorces. Don't do anything that'll hurt your kids or put you in legal trouble. Rob stood, pocketing the envelope. I built this city, Charlie. Half the judges, most of the city council, and all the major contractors owe me favors. Derek Hoffman owes his career to my recommendations. What are you planning? Rob's smile held no warmth. I'm going to remind them both that some foundations, once cracked, can't be repaired. That night, Rob installed motion-activated cameras throughout his basement, hidden within the industrial lighting and ventilation systems he designed. If Jennifer wanted to use his sanctuary for her betrayal, he'd ensure every moment was documented. 3 days later, his phone buzzed with a security alert. The basement cameras had detected movement. Rob was 2 hours away, touring a construction site, but the live feed on his phone showed everything he needed to see. Jennifer and Derek on the leather couch where Rob had taught his children to tie their shoes, where he'd planned business strategies that employed hundreds of families. But this time, Rob didn't just watch. He activated a system he'd installed years ago for security purposes, one that could seal the basement exits remotely. The electronic locks engaged with a soft click that the camera's microphones barely picked up. Rob left the construction site immediately, driving home with the patience of a predator who knows his prey can't escape. Chapter 3. The Call. The basement had been designed as a fortress with reinforced steel doors and a ventilation system that could be controlled from Rob's phone. As he drove home, he tested each system methodically. The locks held. The lights dimmed to emergency power. The temperature began dropping as the climate control responded to his commands. By the time Rob arrived home, Derek's BMW sat in the driveway like a confession. Through his phone, he watched them realize the doors wouldn't open, saw Derek's confident facade crack as he rattled the handles and pressed the emergency buttons that Rob had quietly disabled months ago. Rob entered through the kitchen, where Tyler was doing homework at the counter. Dad? Mom's car is here, but I haven't seen her. She's in the basement with a friend. They're having an important conversation. From upstairs, Rob could hear Derek's voice growing louder, more desperate, as he called for help through the soundproofed walls. Rob had built this basement to contain power tools and construction noise. It would contain Derek's panic equally well. Rob's phone showed Jennifer trying to calm Derek, but her own composure was fracturing. They'd been trapped for 40 minutes, and the temperature had dropped to an uncomfortable 55 degrees. "Tyler," Rob said calmly, "take Emma to your grandmother's house. Tell her I'll pick you up tomorrow. Is everything okay?" Rob's smile felt foreign on his face. "Everything's perfect." After the children left, Rob descended to the basement's main door and knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the steel. "Rob." Jennifer's voice was muffled but audible. "The door's stuck. We can't get out." "I know," Rob replied. "That's the point." The silence that followed was profound. Then Derek's voice, trying to sound authoritative. "Rob, this is a misunderstanding. If you'll just open the door, we can explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been fucking my wife in my house for 8 months. How you used the influence I gave you to destroy my marriage." Rob activated the intercom system he'd installed for communicating with workers during loud projects. Their voices came through crystal clear now. "Rob, please." Jennifer's voice cracked. "I can explain everything." "No need. I have 8 months of bank records showing your new wardrobe, restaurant charges at places we've never been together, and hotel receipts. Charlie Morrison is very thorough." Derek tried a different approach. "Look, this doesn't have to ruin anyone's career. We can work something out." "You're right," Rob interrupted. "It doesn't have to ruin your career. It's going to end it completely." Rob pulled out his phone and made the first call to the mayor's office, where his donation history ensured immediate access. "Tom, it's Rob Dalton. I need to discuss some irregularities in Derek Hoffman's permit approvals." "Yes, I have documentation. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" The second call went to the president of Derek's bank, where Rob's construction loans represented their largest commercial account. "Paul, I've discovered some concerning conflicts of interest involving Derek Hoffman's city position and his personal finances. I think you should know before it becomes public." Through the intercom, Rob could hear Derek pleading with Jennifer, their affair's romance evaporating under pressure. The third call was to his attorney, setting up emergency divorce proceedings that would protect his assets and ensure custody of his children. "Jennifer," Rob finally said into the intercom, "I want you to understand something. I built this house for our family. I designed this basement as my sanctuary. You turned it into the scene of your betrayal, so now it's where that betrayal ends." "What do you mean?" Derek's voice had risen to near hysteria. Rob checked his watch. "It's 7 p.m. The temperature down there will hit freezing around midnight. The oxygen will last until dawn if you don't panic too much." "You can't be serious," Jennifer whispered. "I'm dead serious, but I'm not unreasonable. You have until midnight to decide who's more important to you, Derek or our children, because only one of you is leaving this basement alive." The screaming that followed confirmed Rob's suspicion that Derek wasn't quite the man Jennifer thought she'd fallen in love with. Rob climbed the stairs, leaving his wife and her lover to contemplate the consequences of breaking Robert Dalton's trust. Outside, he could see his neighbors' houses, families settling in for quiet evenings, unaware that the foundation of the Dalton household was finally being demolished and rebuilt to Rob's exact specifications. Chapter 4. The game begins. At 9 p.m., Rob received an unexpected visitor. Tyler stood on the front porch, having somehow convinced his grandmother to drive him back. "Dad, there's something weird going on. Emma's crying and won't tell Grandma why. And Mom's phone keeps going to voicemail." Rob's calculation shifted instantly. His children's well-being superseded even his revenge, a hierarchy Derek and Jennifer had foolishly ignored when they chose his home as their playground. "Come inside, son. We need to talk." Rob led Tyler to the living room, away from the basement door. Through his phone's monitoring app, he could see Derek pacing frantically while Jennifer sat curled in a corner, finally understanding the depth of her mistake. "Your mother made some bad choices," Rob began carefully. "She's been lying to us about where she goes, and she's been bringing someone to our house who doesn't belong here. Tyler's face darkened with premature understanding. The guy with the BMW? I saw him here last week when you were in Portland. Rob felt a flash of pride at his son's observational skills, followed by anger that Jennifer had exposed their children to her deception. That's right. His name is Derek Hoffman. He works for the city, and he's been taking advantage of your mother's confusion. Are you getting divorced? The direct question deserved an honest answer. Yes. Your mother broke promises that can't be fixed. But you and Emma will always be my priority. Tyler nodded with the gravity of someone forced to mature too quickly. What happens now? Rob checked his phone. The basement temperature had dropped to 48 degrees. Derek was trying to break down the door with a wrench from Rob's tool cabinet, achieving nothing but exhaustion against reinforced steel. Now, your mother and Derek learn about consequences. But first, you're going to call Emma and tell her everything will be okay. Then you're going back to Grandma's house. I want to stay with you. Rob's heart ached at the loyalty, but his son couldn't witness what came next. I know you do, but tonight, I need to finish something that started before you were born, when I decided what kind of man I was going to be. At 10 p.m., Rob made his final offer through the intercom. Jennifer, I'm giving you 30 minutes to make a choice. You can try to save Derek, or you can think about Tyler and Emma's future. But understand this. Whoever I pull out of that basement alive will be the only one who survives what's coming next. Derek's voice exploded through the speaker. You're insane. When this gets out, you'll be in prison for kidnapping, for attempted murder. No, Rob interrupted calmly. When this gets out, I'll be a grieving widower whose wife and her lover died in a tragic accident during their secret affair. My basement security system will show how they went down there together and got trapped when the old electronic locks malfunctioned during a power surge. Rob flipped the main electrical breaker, plunging the house into darkness before switching to backup power that excluded the basement. To any investigation, it would look like a system failure had caused the locks to engage automatically. The security cameras will show me arriving home to find their bodies, calling 911 immediately, and desperately trying to break down the door. Very tragic. Very unfortunate. Jennifer's voice came through broken and desperate. Rob, please. I know I hurt you, but Tyler and Emma need their mother. Tyler and Emma need a mother who respects their family enough not to destroy it. You stopped being that person 8 months ago. Rob had spent years studying his wife, learning her patterns and weaknesses the same way he analyzed business competitors. Jennifer was selfish, but not evil, vain, but not heartless. Derek represented everything she thought she wanted: youth, excitement, freedom from responsibility. But when faced with actual consequences, Rob knew which choice she'd make. Derek, meanwhile, was a political creature who'd built his career on charm and connections rather than substance. Under pressure, his true nature was emerging, cowardly, entitled, and willing to sacrifice anyone for his own survival. At 10:25 p.m., Jennifer's voice came through the intercom with the flat tone of surrender. Rob, I choose my children. I choose Tyler and Emma. Derek's screaming protest was cut short by the sound of Jennifer hitting him with something heavy, probably the metal toolbox Rob kept by his workbench. Rob smiled. His wife was many things, but she'd never been weak. Chapter 5. Reconstruction. Rob waited until Derek's voice stopped coming through the intercom before engaging the basement's emergency release. The steel door opened with a hydraulic whisper, revealing Jennifer standing over Derek's unconscious form, her face streaked with tears and determination. Is he dead? Rob asked clinically. No, but he will be if you want him to be. Rob studied his wife in the emergency lighting, blonde hair disheveled, expensive dress torn, manicured hands bloodied from gripping the toolbox she'd used as a weapon. This was the woman he'd married, before comfort and complacency had dulled her survival instincts. I don't want him dead, Rob said finally. Dead men can't suffer properly. Rob descended into his sanctuary, now reclaimed through violence and choice. Derek was breathing but unconscious, a gash across his forehead where Jennifer had struck him. Help me get him upstairs. Together, they carried Derek to the living room, Rob noting how Jennifer moved with purpose now, the affair's romantic delusion replaced by practical necessity. Rob, I need you to know. No explanations. Rob cut her off. Explanations are for people who made mistakes. You made choices. 8 months of calculated choices. Derek groaned back to consciousness as Rob zip-tied his hands behind his back, a skill learned from years of securing construction materials. What happens to him? Jennifer asked. Derek's going to help me send a message about the cost of betraying trust. Rob had spent the last 3 hours making calls, and the trap was already springing shut around Derek's life. By morning, his bank would freeze his accounts pending an investigation into irregularities in city permit approvals. His political allies would distance themselves from the scandal Rob's documentation had already put in motion. But that was just the beginning. Derek's eyes focused on Rob with the desperate clarity of a cornered animal. You can't do this. I have rights. You had rights, Rob corrected. You also had a wife, a career, and a future. All things you gambled away when you decided to fuck my wife in my house. Rob pulled out his phone and showed Derek a photo. Derek's wife Linda at their suburban home, unaware that her husband's affair was about to destroy everything she'd built her life around. Linda's going to receive some interesting photographs tomorrow, along with bank records showing how you've been spending city money on hotel rooms and gifts for your mistress. Derek's face went white. Linda doesn't deserve this. Neither did my children, Rob replied. But you made your choice when you involved our families in your selfishness. Jennifer watched this exchange with growing understanding. She thought her affair was about love and excitement. But Rob was showing her the brutal mathematics of betrayal, how every action created consequences that spread like cracks through multiple foundations. What do you want from me? Derek whispered. Rob's smile was sharp as construction steel. I want you to disappear. Tonight. Forever. Because if I ever see you again, if you ever contact my wife or approach my children, I'll finish what Jennifer started in that basement. And go where? Do what? You're destroying my entire life. I'm giving you the chance to start over somewhere else, which is more mercy than you showed my family. Take it. Rob cut Derek's zip ties and watched him stumble toward the door. His political confidence shattered along with his skull. Derek would leave town, Rob knew. Men like him always ran when confronted with real consequences. As Derek's BMW disappeared down the driveway, Jennifer finally spoke. What happens to us? Rob looked at his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who'd shared his bed for 15 years and then shared his sanctuary with another man. We rebuild, he said simply, but on my terms this time. Chapter 6, New Foundations. The divorce papers Jennifer signed were more comprehensive than a construction contract and equally unforgiving. Rob's attorney had crafted them during the long night, ensuring that Jennifer's affair would cost her everything except minimal custody rights. Rights she'd retain only as long as she adhered to Rob's conditions. Supervised visits only for the first year, Rob explained as Jennifer read through the settlement. All contact with Tyler and Emma monitored. No overnight stays until they're 18 and can choose for themselves. Jennifer's hand trembled as she turned the pages. The financial terms were devastating but not vindictive. She'd receive enough support to live modestly, but the mansion, the investments, and the children would remain with Rob. This is the best deal you're going to get, Rob continued, because it's based on me believing you chose our children over Derek. If I find out you've contacted him, if I discover you're planning to continue this relationship anywhere, I'm not. Jennifer interrupted quickly. Rob, I swear whatever we had is over. Rob studied her face with the same intensity he brought to reading architectural blueprints. The woman sitting across from him was hollow-eyed and diminished. Her suburban princess fantasy collapsed under the weight of real consequences. Good. Because Derek's political career ended this morning when the mayor received my documentation of his permit irregularities. His wife filed for divorce after receiving those photographs Charlie took. His bank froze his accounts. And I made sure word reached his new girlfriend's husband. Apparently Derek's been quite busy. Jennifer's eyes widened. How many others? 3 that we found. Turns out your city commissioner has a pattern of using his position to seduce married women with construction permits or zoning appeals. You weren't special, Jennifer. You were just convenient. The devastation in Jennifer's expression might have moved Rob once, but that capacity for mercy had been cauterized in the basement when she'd chosen their children over her lover. Tyler and Emma returned from their grandmother's house that afternoon to find their mother packing suitcases and their father making dinner with unusual attention to detail. "Are you leaving, Mom?" Emma asked with 11-year-old directness. Jennifer knelt to her daughter's eye level. "For a while, sweetheart. Mommy made some mistakes that hurt Daddy and our family. I need to go away and think about how to fix them." Tyler, more perceptive at 14, watched his father's reaction. Rob's face remained impassive, but Tyler caught the slight nod. Approval for Jennifer's honesty, rare enough to be noteworthy. "Will you visit us?" Emma's voice was small. "Every weekend," Jennifer promised, glancing at Rob for confirmation. He nodded again. The custody arrangement would allow that much. After Jennifer left for her new apartment across town, Rob sat with his children at the kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of meals as a family. "Is this our fault?" Emma asked. "Did we do something wrong?" Rob's chest tightened. His daughter's guilt was the one consequence he hadn't calculated, the crack in his own foundation he hadn't anticipated. "No, baby girl. This is about choices adults made. Your mother chose to break promises she made to me, and I chose not to accept that. Those were our decisions, not yours." Tyler, wrestling with his own understanding, asked, "Dad, are you going to be okay?" Rob looked at his son, almost as tall as Rob now, with the same stubborn jaw and direct gaze that had carried Rob through decades of challenges. "I'm going to be better than okay. We're going to be better than okay. Because we're going to rebuild our family the right way this time, with trust, honesty, and respect for each other." That night, after the children were asleep, Rob returned to his basement sanctuary. The leather couch where Jennifer and Derek had betrayed his trust sat empty, but it no longer felt contaminated. It was just furniture now, in a space that belonged to him and his children. Rob opened his phone and reviewed the construction plans for a new project, a community center that would employ dozens of workers and serve hundreds of families. Building had always been his answer to destruction, creation his response to loss. He'd torn down a marriage, exposed a corrupt official, and restructured his family according to his specifications. The foundation was solid now, built on consequences rather than compromises. Rob Dalton had always been a man who built things to last. Now he was going to build a future where betrayal carried a price too high for anyone to pay. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months later, Rob's reconstruction was nearly complete. Tyler had grown 3 inches and joined the varsity wrestling team, channeling his anger into the sport his father understood. Emma had stopped asking when Mommy was coming home permanently and started helping Rob plan their weekend activities. Jennifer's supervised visits had become routine, Saturday afternoons at neutral locations, conversations that stayed carefully surface level, a relationship rebuilt around the children's needs rather than adult complications. But Derek Hoffman had made a critical error. Instead of disappearing as Rob had ordered, he'd remained in the city, taking a job with a competing construction firm and rebuilding his life on the assumption that Rob's revenge was complete. Charlie Morrison's call came on a Tuesday morning. "Rob, you need to see this." The photographs showed Derek meeting with Vincent Torres, owner of Torres Construction, Rob's primary competitor for city contracts. The images captured handshakes, document exchanges, and what appeared to be very friendly negotiations. "They're planning something," Charlie explained. "Derek's been feeding Torres information about your bid processes, your client relationships, everything he learned during his time with the Planning Commission." Rob studied the photos with the cold analysis that had built his empire. Derek had violated the fundamental rule of defeated enemies. He tried to rebuild by attacking rather than retreating. "There's more," Charlie continued. "Derek's been telling people around town that you kidnapped him, that you threatened his life. He's building a case that you're mentally unstable and dangerous to work with." Rob smiled, recognizing the pattern. Derek was attempting to use Rob's own reputation for ruthlessness against him, turning strength into weakness through clever narrative construction. "Has Torres filed any formal complaints? Gone to the police?" "No. Derek's smart enough to know he can't prove anything, and Torres doesn't want to risk your political connections. But they're definitely planning to damage your business reputation. Rob made 2 phone calls. The first was to his attorney, requesting documentation of every city contract Derek had influenced during his affair with Jennifer. The second was to Vincent Torres directly. Vincent, it's Rob Dalton. I think we should meet. I have some information about Derek Hoffman that affects both our businesses. The meeting took place at Rob's office, in the conference room, where he negotiated $100 million projects. Vincent Torres arrived with Derek in tow, clearly expecting some kind of showdown. Rob had prepared differently. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Vincent, I assume Derek has told you about our personal difficulties? Torres nodded cautiously. He mentioned some problems with your wife. Did he mention that during his affair with Jennifer, he used his position on the Planning Commission to fast-track my permit applications in exchange for her companionship? The question hung in the air like construction dust. Derek's face went pale as Rob continued. Did he explain that every project approval he influenced while sleeping with my wife constitutes corruption of public office? Or that the FBI is very interested in his pattern of trading permits for sexual favors with multiple married women? Rob slid a folder across the table, not to Derek but to Torres. Vincent, you've built a respectable business over 20 years. Are you sure you want to associate with someone whose very presence makes every contract he touches legally questionable? Torres opened the folder, his expression growing darker as he read. Rob had documented everything. Derek's permit approvals, the timeline of his affair with Jennifer, the pattern of corruption that extended far beyond one relationship. This is all circumstantial, Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, it's not, Rob replied calmly, because Jennifer has agreed to testify about every conversation where you discussed manipulating city processes. Every time you bragged about your influence. Every promise you made to smooth the way for projects in exchange for continued access to my wife. Derek's political instincts finally recognized the trap. Rob hadn't just documented the affair. He created a legal framework that made Derek's very existence a liability to anyone who worked with him. You're bluffing, Derek said desperately. Jennifer would never. Jennifer will do whatever protects her children's future, Rob interrupted. And her children's future depends on their father maintaining his business and reputation. You're not just my enemy, Derek. You're a threat to Tyler and Emma's inheritance. Vincent Torres closed the folder and looked at Derek with the expression of a man cutting loose dead weight. Derek, I think our business relationship is concluded. Derek left the building alone, his brief comeback shattered by the same miscalculation that had cost him everything the first time, underestimating Robert Dalton's capacity for patient, thorough destruction. Chapter 8. The Final Blow. Derek's desperation made him dangerous in ways Rob hadn't anticipated. Cut off from legitimate employment and facing potential federal corruption charges, Derek began stalking Jennifer during her custody visits, appearing at the restaurants and parks where she met with Tyler and Emma. Emma noticed first, pointing out the man who keeps watching us during a Saturday afternoon at the zoo. Tyler, now 15 and protective of his sister, was ready to confront Derek directly. No, Rob said firmly when Tyler suggested action. Derek is trying to provoke us into doing something stupid. We're going to be smarter than that. But Derek's harassment escalated. He followed Jennifer home from her custody visits, left threatening messages on her apartment voicemail, and began spreading rumors that Rob had threatened to kill him. All carefully crafted to build a case for police intervention without admitting his own criminal behavior. The breaking point came when Derek approached Emma directly outside her school, claiming to be a friend of Mommy's who needed to talk to her about her father. Emma, trained by Rob's careful lessons about strangers, ran to the school office instead of listening. But the incident crossed every line Rob had established for protecting his children. That evening, Rob made a different kind of call, not to lawyers or investigators, but to Mickey Torino, a foreman who'd worked for Rob for 15 years and whose loyalty ran deeper than professional obligation. Mickey, remember when that subcontractor tried to steal copper from the Riverside site? Sure, You had me and the boys convince him to find work in another state. I need that kind of convincing again. But this time it's personal. Mickey asked no questions. Men who'd worked construction for decades understood the difference between business disputes and threats to family. The conversation took place in Derek's apartment parking lot at 2 a.m., with Derek awakened by a knock on his door that he was wise enough not to ignore. Mickey and two other foremen, all built like the heavy machinery they operated, delivered Rob's final message with the clarity that only comes from absolute certainty. Mr. Dalton wants you to understand that your next choice is permanent, Mickey explained in the tone he used for safety briefings. You can leave this city tonight and never come back, or you can stay and see what happens when you threaten his children. Derek, understanding that he'd finally pushed beyond the realm of legal consequences into something more primitive and final, made the smart choice. His apartment was empty by dawn, his car gone, his forwarding address non-existent. Rob received confirmation through Charlie Morrison that Derek had withdrawn his savings and disappeared, this time apparently understanding that some men's patience had limits that couldn't be tested twice. Jennifer called that afternoon, her voice shaky with relief. He's gone. Derek's gone. I know. Rob, what did you do? I protected our children, Rob replied simply. Something I should have done more thoroughly the first time. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of everything that had been destroyed and rebuilt. Thank you, Jennifer finally whispered. Rob felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. Derek's removal was simply maintenance, like repairing a foundation crack before it could spread. This ends it, Jennifer. Derek, the affair, the consequences, all of it. We move forward now, for Tyler and Emma. I understand. Rob believed she did. His wife had learned the true cost of betrayal, not just to herself, but to everyone connected to her choices. She'd pay that price for the rest of her life, in limited custody and supervised visits, and the knowledge that her children's father was a man who never forgot and never forgave completely. But she'd also learned that Robert Dalton protected what belonged to him with a precision and commitment that few people could match or challenge. Chapter 9. Solid Ground. 2 years after Derek's disappearance, the Dalton family had found its new equilibrium. Tyler, now 17 and captain of the wrestling team, had grown into a young man who understood that strength came with responsibility. Emma, 13 and showing signs of her father's analytical mind, excelled in math and science while maintaining the emotional intelligence her mother had possessed before corruption set in. Jennifer's custody visits had evolved from supervised encounters to genuine relationships with her children, though she lived in permanent exile from the family she'd helped destroy. She worked as a dental hygienist again, supporting herself modestly while rebuilding trust one careful weekend at a time. Rob had expanded Dalton Construction into 3 states, employing over 800 people and earning recognition as a leader in sustainable building practices. The community center he'd built after the divorce served as headquarters for youth programs that kept kids like Tyler and Emma engaged in positive activities. The basement that had once been violated by betrayal now housed Tyler's weight training equipment and Emma's science experiments. Rob had never spoken to his children about what had happened in that space during the affair, but Tyler seemed to understand why his father occasionally stared at the walls with the expression of a man remembering battles fought and won. Derek Hoffman's name had faded from city memory, his brief political career reduced to a cautionary tale about corruption and the consequences of overreaching. Rob occasionally wondered if Derek had managed to rebuild somewhere else, but the wondering was academic. Derek was no longer his problem. The mail arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Rob recognized Jennifer's handwriting immediately. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with 3 words, "I am sorry." Rob studied the note, remembering the woman who'd written it. Young, beautiful, laughing in the kitchen of their first apartment while he planned the empire that would eventually protect and provide for their children. He filed the letter in his desk drawer, not because forgiveness was possible, but because some communications required acknowledgement even when they changed nothing. Tyler found him there an hour later, reviewing blueprints for a new housing development that would employ dozens of families. "Dad, I got accepted to state engineering program." Rob looked up at his son, tall, confident, carrying himself with the quiet strength that came from watching his father rebuild their world through will and precision. Full scholarship, academic, and wrestling. Coach says I've got potential for nationals if I keep working. Rob nodded, pride mixing with satisfaction. Tyler would build his own empire someday, but he'd do it with the foundation Rob had provided. The understanding that trust was earned, betrayal was punished, and family was protected at any cost. What about Emma's science fair project? First place, regional competition. She's going to states with that water purification system you helped her design. Rob smiled, thinking of his daughter's brilliance applied to solving real problems rather than creating them. Emma would change the world through innovation rather than construction, but she'd carry the same principles: precision, patience, and the knowledge that some people could be trusted and others could only be contained. That evening, as Rob tucked Emma into bed, she asked the question he'd been expecting for months. "Dad, do you think Mom will ever come home for good?" Rob considered his answer carefully, weighing honesty against hope. "No, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean our family is broken. It just means we rebuilt it stronger." Emma nodded with the acceptance of a child who'd learned that strength sometimes required difficult choices. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, baby girl." Rob turned off her bedroom light and walked to his study, where the blueprints for tomorrow's projects waited on his desk. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city he'd helped build, the neighborhoods where his employees lived, the schools and hospitals and community centers that bore his company's signature. Robert Dalton had learned long ago that some foundations, once cracked, could never be repaired, only demolished and rebuilt according to better specifications. He'd applied that knowledge to his marriage, his business, and his family with the same precision he brought to construction projects. The results were solid, functional, and built to last. Outside, the city hummed with the quiet activity of people living their lives on foundations they trusted to hold. Rob had made sure those foundations were worthy of that trust, just as he'd made sure his children understood the difference between building and destroying, between strength and weakness, between loyalty and betrayal. Derek Hoffman was gone. Jennifer lived